Welcome everyone as everyone starts to join us. Today, Pedro will be talking about salt extensions and doing kind of an overview. He'll answer some questions. And this is the first of this meeting, so it's exciting.
It is.
It is. We are very excited.
Just to confirm, are you seeing?
Yes.
Awesome.
That's interesting. So when you show this, I can see where you have black bars for Zoom. How interesting. I've never seen that before. It's very, very interesting.
I believe it's for the live transcript stuff.
Let me turn that off. So I think that we can, if you switch between screens and things, that will not always work. And I do download a transcript that can be edited, a transcript file, so we can use that instead. And let's, you want to give us kind of a general description as people are joining, Pedro? Salt extensions. Yeah.
So salt extensions, might as well start it. So this is the agenda. What's a salt extension? Some tooling that we created, an example project and some Q&A at the end. And so at its core, what is a salt extension? It's basically a Python package that is pip installable. And at its core, that's it. It only needs a few things, which are, it needs to use entry points. So salt.loader is the salt entry point. And we define the loaders that we want to use. In the example shown, execution module. So the first one, module dirs, and that's a path to a module and a function. And then state dirs is for state execution modules. It also needs a file. So in this case, it's the loader.py that I show below. And it basically just needs to return a list of directories so that the salt loader knows where to load these extensions from, the modules, the execution modules, and the state execution modules. And at its core, that's it. It doesn't need anything else, and Salt will pick it up and we'll load them and we'll use them. An example of such execution modules, if you've worked with Salt, this is a regular Salt module. Just because it's outside of Salt, nothing actually changes. So this is like the raw layout of an execution module. And when you try to run it, it's the same as any other Python execution module. So salt-c, because I'm using a local configuration, the target, so I'm targeting all minions. And this extension is called presentation. And I'm calling the example function, which is just an echo and returns the text. And that's what it returns. And so basically, that's really it. But we have gone ahead and created a a little tooling around it so that we can have a directory structure laid out, minimal documentation about the project, GitHub Actions set up to test the project, example execution modules, example state modules. You can pass the loader on the loader, so -L in this case. And it will also add pre-commit, which will maintain, for example, the requirements the same way that Salt does. It also adds black so that at least the code style is similar to that one of Salt. So if you have a contributor which is used to contribute to Salt, but it's contributing to one of your extensions, the code will feel similar to what's seen in Salt and a few other niceties. This is an opinionated tool. Maybe in the future, instead of creating our own tool, we will piggyback on something like Cookie Cutter, which has more options and is more configurable. But for now, this tool exists. So it's Salt extension, just pip install Salt extension, and you can use it. And so an example of using SAT tooling is create so pip install Salt extension, and then create Salt extension, -A is for the author, -E for the email, -S for the subject description of the project, -U for the URL, and then -L is the license. It only supports Apache at the moment. So if you want to start your own extension with a different licensing, you have to overwrite the license file. And then we, on the -lowercase l, we pass modules and states. Those are the loaders that we want our extension to support. You can pass whatever loaders Salt supports. So you can have runners, grains, even logging handlers. Every loader that Salt supports can exist in a Salt extension. So the tool we create the bare bones. It will also tell you a minimal set of commands to get you going. And that's it. After these steps, you have the tooling ready for you to start hacking on it. This is, okay, so with the tooling, we also lay out a minimal test suite. The test suite is based on PyTest Salt factories, which is capable of starting the Salt master and the Salt daemon for you, the Salt minion for you. This is like the minimal layout. I will show you this on a directory tree so that you can see where this will end up. But this is to configure the Salt factories. Just need that first fixture Salt factors config. That's just in case you need to override something, because by default, it's sufficient. If you want to start a Salt master, you need to define a fixture which will start a master from Salt factories, and also a minion at the bottom as shown here. Do note that this master and this minion hasn't start. So this is just it just lays out the configuration files for it to run tests against. It does not start the daemons, which is something that we only want to do when we start integration testing. And so for that, we will do something like this on a separate file, on a separate pytest conf-test.py file. And so we basically inherit from the master fixture, although we are redefining it. And we basically are making sure that the master is started, the minion is started, and we are also defining fixtures for the sites for the Salt CLI tooling. So Salt run, Salt, and Salt call. And an example use of a test, and for this is an example of what the tooling generates. So a simple test function, we add Salt call CLI, which is the fixture we previously defined. and we call it, so salt calls CLI.run. We call our extension function. We pass the arguments, and then we assert against the exit code if we have output, in our case, JSON output, and then we confirm if we're getting back the thing that we want to get back. So tests, in this case, this is an integration test, and this is testing against the running salt master and the salt minion, which have been connected and keys have been accepted, etc., etc. So that's PyTest salt factories, which simplifies a lot of this work of testing your extension. And for example, this is an example of what the test suite running after you created your extension. It also has a small report at the end about coverage. So that's why this is an opinionated tooling. It does things a lot on how Salt does them. And you don't have to do things like this. As I mentioned right at the start, it just needs entry points defined and a module that points some directories for the salt loader to pick up. References in this case. So the salt extension is a tool. PyTest salt factories, as I mentioned. And at the end of this link is the salt presentation. But before we go into Q&A, let's just see this in action. Can you see my shells?
I'm not seeing a shell.
There's a
Or
black.
not? Wow. Okay, let me reshare that and see if that's the problem. Can you see it now?
Just see your desktop,
With the pretty image?
like
With
a
the
bunch of
pretty
triangles
image.
and squares.
No. Damn you, Zoom, you give me so many options. Okay, let's try this. You see some shelling.
Yes.
Ta-da! Awesome. So let me just exemplify of how the tooling works. I'm just going to create something separate. So CD1, create salt extension. This is what I've shown you. These are the commands. And these are the commands that we should be running. This takes a little time, especially on the next steps, because it's going to compile linting, compiling the requirements files, just the same way that we do with salt. But anyway, this is having it running. We committed, but I've done that before this. So let's use what I have, which is this directory structure here. So if you have done some Python developing, some of this might you might know some of these files. So setup.py, pyproject.toml, those are basic things that I'm not going to go too deep into them. I will, however, show you the directory structure of our project. So source, I'm using a namespace package, saltxt. It's not a requirement. You can have a top level package for your extension, but in this case, it's a namespace saltxt package. Then our extension presentation, the loader module, the loader Python module, which defines the directories. So source, saltxt, presentation, loader. Then the modules, and this is the example module that I've shown you, and state modules. This is basic stuff, and you should not use this out of the box. You should do this with useful code. About the testing, so test conf test, not this one. These are the fixers that we defined. So we just configure the master, and then we can here configure the minion. And for the integration tests, we actually start them. So it's with this context manager that we make sure that the salt master actually starts. If it does not start, the test will fail. So you'll have a you'll know why it's failing. And just for an example test, which is also what I've shown you, here it is. If we run the test suite, it's as simple as this. Again, we are using Nox, which is the same thing that we use in Salt. And this is taking time because it's starting the master. So PyTest Salt Factory simplifies the work. It does not make it faster. So starting a master in the minion does take its time. But we should have, once it starts, the test should be quite fast. And we're done. Our extension passed the tests, although these tests are almost not even meaningful. But let's see it in action. So let's start a master. Let's start a minion. And let's call our presentation.example function. Voila, we have our text echoed. If you are targeting the last stable release of Salt, which is 3002.6, you will not see what I'm going to show you, but the next version of Salt, so 3003, we have this nice thing, like this. There's the Edge versions report, which is all the extensions that are installed will be shown on the versions report. If you are targeting 3003 and not a version older, there are some changes that you don't, there are some things that you don't have to implement. For example, the entry points can be simplified to this, which is you just point it to the module. And as long as you have the directory structure similar to the one that Salt has, which is a modules directory for modules, a states directory for states, the runners directory for runners, all of those extensions will be picked up automatically. And you will also not need this loader module which returns the directories, because Salt from version 3003 will know where to look for them, although you can still use this, so it's backwards compatible. And yeah, I guess I'm ready for Q&A. Shoot me some questions.
Yeah. So is the real benefit of this over just writing extension modules and storing them in the underscore module folder that you can actually create real packages from it and effectively get the scaffold for the project structure as well as testing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So the biggest, so historically, or better, a little background. We have extension support in Salt since 2014 or 16. I can't recall right now. So for quite a long time, but we never publicized it. The work was initially implemented to support Salt Enterprise and its extensions. And once we had that working, my bad, I never added documentation for that. And I guess now it's more than the time that to publicize this, because we have been getting new additions to the Salt code base, which is already quite big. And there's only a few of us core developers to maintain it, because sadly, sometimes contributors contribute a module, but they don't maintain it. So the burden comes on us. And for what we have, so for the Salt modules that we have, that's not a problem. So we have to maintain them, and we do it as best as we can. But if you're creating something new, and now that you know about Salt extensions, you can actually create your extensions outside of Salt and test them, because it was also a problem because before PyTest Salt factors, it was a problem to test the extensions outside of Salt. You basically had to copy your extensions into the Salt test suite, have it running, and run the tests. And now it's way simpler.
So
go ahead. This also has the added benefit that you can release on a faster cadence, faster than Salt.
Right. So is that the direction we're kind of headed, where if new extensions need to be added, rather than adding them to the core code base, contributors should create these extension modules, and they can be curated, kind of like how the formula organization is curated?
So without having all of the details laid out right now, that's roughly the plan. We have an index. I can show you a rough draft. Can you see my browser now? Oh, you're still seeing the shell?
Nope. Yep.
Ah.
I think it works best to stop sharing and reshare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Zoom on Linux, I assume?
Yes.
Yeah, it doesn't work so great there.
and be thankful, because it has been crashing a lot and freezing a lot lately on my box.
I know the feels, man.
So extensions, no, Salt project. Extensions.saltproject.io. This is a rough draft of what might become the Salt extensions index. The idea behind this is, and now you're not seeing my shell, right?
Now I'm seeing nothing but black.
Oh, okay. So
I saw your browser for a second.
Yeah, that's good, because now you should be seeing a Python. Really black, or do you see me type?
It's all black. I just see your cursor.
Okay, never mind. Let's go back to this.
There we go.
Yeah. So you can define some keywords when you create your Python package. If you add salt-extension as a keyword, we will have sorry, we will have a job checking for new projects on PyPy that have that keyword. We will also be looking for projects that start with salt-ext-something, and probably even salt-ext-something. And we will try to install it. We will try to see if it's a Salt project. And if it's a Salt project, we will run the test suite. The idea behind this is to have a compatibility as shown here. So extension, in this case, TIDX1 is compatible with 3.5 on Linux version 3001.3. And the idea is to have the several supported Salt versions at the time, the several Python versions supported at the time, and give you a success or failure for the test suite that runs. This would also be this would also be a central place to look for extensions. I need something for Salt. Has someone done set extension? And if they have, it's just installing it. But again, this is just a rough draft of what might become the Salt extensions index. As we work on this and see some user adoption, we will devote some time to getting a proper index and not just a mock-up as shown here.
So is the plan basically that you guys are going to be scanning PyPy for these things, or does this need to be reported, or what?
Initially, we are going to scan like a cron job, something like probably daily, or if we get any emails from PyPy weekly. So we will be scanning for new additions to PyPy. And we will try to see if the new additions are salt related. And if they are added to a queue where we then run the test suite. And we will do at least once a week. I think that's what I have right now. But we check PyPy like daily. We don't download all of the information, of course. We just check. So the first time, yes, but the next time we just see if there are new projects or if there are older projects that were deleted and stuff like that. But the idea at first it is to search PyPy for extensions. Of course, there are things that could be implemented in the long run, like as you mentioned, we could have something like Karma for the extensions. And if an extension has a high karma and there's a lot of people using, I think at that stage we might consider adding that to salt, or not if that's not the desire of the maintainer, of course. But that's a way for us to get a more curated list of what goes into salt, instead of accepting everything and then it's not maintained or it's fully maintained until someone uses it and says, oh, it's broken. So we are trying to be better at that and have a more curated source of modules for salt.
Yeah, this is going to allow for way more velocity on these as well. I'm really happy about that.
Yeah.
Hey, Pedro, so when you install these, so like I've got an infrastructure, and I find there's some awesome new extension I need to use. How do I actually deploy that? Do I, like, say I have, 10 minions out of my 100 that I want to have this extension installed, and do I have to like pip install that on each of those minions? Do I do it central to master? What if I'm on a completely isolated network with no internet access? Can I deploy from my salt master, or what kind of, I know there's a lot of questions there, but what's that process look like?
So this is a basic Python package. If you have access to internet, sorry, you can have a state file that you can target a few meanings of your fleet to pip install the extension. For the scenario that you mentioned, you don't have internet access. You can probably download the source package from PyPy, add it to the stage 3 on the salt master, and then pip install it by targeting the tarball from the master.
Okay, that
and
sounds
this
great.
way, this way the tarball can be distributed by the master. Then you have to pip install it. One thing that I have to confirm is that I think the minion might have to be restarted because it's a entry points related thing. At least I had a coworker from VMware that is working on an extension saying that the extension wasn't being picked up, but as soon as he restarted the daemons, it was. So I need to confirm that because Python might not check for new sorry, entry points unless the process is restarted. And probably there's something we can do so that we don't have to restart the minions and master, but I haven't investigated further along that path.
Hey, Pedro.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, I can confirm that you do have to restart the minion to get that new module picked up. Unless you're using salt call, then that it just works.
Okay, so that's something that we can investigate to see if we can clear Python's internet caching with regards to the loaded entry points or not. So worst case, yeah, you can install the extension, you restart your minions, and then you have everything working.
Okay, I really like that, because the only thing that bothered me about the current underscore modules scenario is that would push that module down to every single minion on my system. When a lot of times I'm like, I don't want the the MySQL module pushed down everywhere, or whatever I'm doing. I want it on these specific thing. So I like that.
Yeah,
and it's very Pythonic, fits in the Python world. So
yeah, we didn't want to reinvent the wheel, so we are using whatever the Python ecosystem is giving us. So entry points, Python packages. I read the other day that sorry, there was a PEP accepted for package metadata. So who knows, in the future we can say we can add metadata to say this extension is compatible with this version of Salt and not this one. Although requirements already gives us a little bit of that, but we can have, for example, keywords. And if PyPy allows us to query their API and search for keywords, then we don't have to download the packages to check for new extensions. So, but yeah, we try to rely as much as possible on what exists and what is known for most Python developers, and go from there.
Now, would it be possible to ship utils modules this way?
So we actually had a discussion internally about the, or better, before I say that, are you referring to the Underutils or basic utils modules? Python modules?
No, the Underutils. Basically, some modules have like utility functions that are not appropriate to for execution models, maybe, and it's a common thing to ship them as a utility.
So I'm on the side that we shouldn't have never added Underutils. I acknowledge that it has its use, but it's dangerous, especially with extensions. Say that you have an extension that has a pretty cool name, and it seems like, oh, I want this on my environment. And it patches Underutils. And for example, it patches http.query with its own version of http.query. And now all Python code that relies on that utility might either fail or be exposed to something. I know that it's on you because you've installed the extension, but the last talk that we had internally about Underutils is we are not removing it from Salt because we added it, so we now have to support it. But we considered, sorry, we considered not supporting it for Salt extensions. Currently, it's possible, so we haven't done anything to stop that. But I should say that for these extensions, I do not see the use case for that. If you want to use a utility module that is from another extension, you depend on that extension and you import the function. If you want to use,
I would go so far as to say that we should actually not, like, if it works today, we should make sure that it doesn't work.
Yeah, it works because a Salt extension basically, as long as you have the returning utils, the Salt folder will pick it up. And so, yeah, we can block it. I think we should. You can use the Underutils from Salt, but you should not be able to override that.
Okay. Essentially, if you have some code that could commonly be used, just stick it in a library and let things depend on it.
Okay. Are there some plans from VMware to maybe strip some modules from core and ship them as extensions, or develop like some new modules that are separate from the beginning?
Yes.
Yes.
Can
Well,
you
as I-
elaborate on that? What's the planned modules could be?
So right now, the only thing that we know about that we have planned for is some of the existing VMware modules that work with VMware products are going to be pulled out into separate extensions and developed separately outside of Salt. We as the core team are looking at other potential modules that we can pull out and support, but we have not decided on anything yet.
Let me just say that at least so far, the word is that these extension modules that VMware is pulling out and creating on top of that will remain open source. So there will not be like, at least it's not planned right now to have proprietary extensions by VMware.
I wanted to make a quick comment, just like adding a little more color, I think, to Max's question about the utilities. If you have like utilities in an extension and they're specific to that extension, you can still include that utils directory in the extension and just reference it inside the extension. It won't be in, as Pedro said, it won't be in Underutils, and you won't be able to like access it in other Salt modules. But as far as your extension, it's still just a Python import away from being accessible to your extension.
Even if you need a utility from another extension, as long as you also depend on that extension and you import the utility function from that extension using regular Python imports, you can still make use of that.
Okay,
Just
good.
not using Underutils.
Right.
I
Or
thought
another
you guys
option
were
would be if you
basic
have
stuff.
something that's going to be shared across lots of different extensions, you just
Yeah.
make it a library and let those pull it in as a requirement.
Will the extension model shadow some built-in one?
It is possible. The same way that you can override internal modules when you pass the underscore modules, you can shadow. I think the reasoning at least from the core team, and this is like, we need to see how we can cleanly do this, is to have some kind of priority. Like, for example, stuff in core should not be overridden by extensions. At least right now, that's the reasoning behind it. But to answer your question, right now you can. But most likely we will have some safeguard, at least regarding some core modules of Salt. For example, overriding the CMD module could potentially break Salt itself as a whole. So there are a few core modules that should never be overridden. You can extend.
Yeah. So this is an ongoing conversation that we're having internally, but I think right now my take on it is that we would not allow things to be overridden by extensions unless someone puts something in a config file that explicitly allows it.
Like a module override.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking would probably be the most appropriate. Because then you're accepting the risks. You're explicitly saying, I want to do this.
Exactly. But just by installing an extension, you wouldn't get odd behavior that you're not expecting.
Right.
However,
So
that's not the case today. Today, if you installed it, you would, it would get overridden potentially.
I could see that being potentially problematic, having to have like, unless it was properly documented and properly said, like, you have to do this in order to override these things. Because as we start moving stuff out into extensions, we're going to start deprecating those older modules, and we're going to want people to be able to install the extension and have it override those existing modules before they're removed from
Right.
Salt.
So that is another thing that we discussed.
Yes, sometimes overriding is quite useful when some module isn't working properly.
So we'll have to have an ongoing discussion about that. But I think it would be all right to have to make it explicit still.
Are there some plans to also support item modules that were added in the last major release? Like some bridge to call item modules from.
There is a bridge, I
extensions.
believe, already added.
But is it possible to distribute item modules that could be called from salt through extension?
That's uncharted territory. In theory, yes, because
Yeah,
Salt
it
already
seems-
provides the item bridge. So yes, but it's in theory because I, for one, haven't tested it, but it should be possible, yes.
So is this basically the first steps toward actually documenting and presenting this to the community, the first steps towards that modular version of SALT project that has been discussed before?
The Salt way, yes.
Okay.
So basically, we now have a choice to ship models through file server, through Salt extensions, and there's probably some abilities to do that through custom packaging in Tiamat.
Yes.
Yes. So the thing about these extensions is, of course, you could use them internally, but the original sort of intention is that an extension is something that you're not going to just use at your organization, but you can distribute for other people to use. So it's on PyPy, it lives on PyPy. Anyone can grab it and start using it.
I guess the biggest problem would be ability to avoid restarting minions and masters, because file server based modules are easy to, some of them can even be refreshed automatically, like execution models.
Yeah, we'll have to look at that.
Restart is disruptive.
It doesn't
why-
seem like that should be needed.
Yeah, and so the problem is, I think it's also historic background on the Python packaging ecosystem. Setup tools and entry points were slow. These days they are way faster. But you still have to scan the site packages directory tree. So there might be some caching mechanism in place, Python, that does not rescan unless explicitly told to. So I think we can probably do something with regards to not having to restart the daemons, but we will have to dig in and see why that's happening. My guess is it's what is it called now? So setup tools has the package entry points, and Python now ships with something, I forgot the name, but it also uses some caching. So my guess is that caching is preventing the new extension to be picked up by the running process. But right now, yeah, you will have to restart your daemons. Hopefully in one of the next releases of Salt, we will have tackled that.
Pedro, there were a couple of questions in the chat. I just want to make sure.
Oh, sorry, I'm not seeing the chat. So yeah, let me stop sharing and see the chat. Sorry, guys. How will this work with environments? It won't. Because when you talk about environments, you're talking about a state tree. And in this case, they are unrelated, and I'll explain. So when you ship modules, you could actually have a module in one of the Salt environments, for example, base, and have another set of modules on the prod Salt environment. But that would be delivered to the Salt minions through the state tree, so the file server. with this case, these extensions are just like any other Python module. They are not going to be sent out to the minions through the file server. You have to pip install them. And so there's no salt env attached to these extensions.
Got it. Thanks, Pedro.
Yep. If we develop only runners in salt extensions, do we need to restart the salt master? I would say no, because the runner, so salt-run runs on its own process. However, if you are using Salt API to call out to runners, probably.
Or if you're
So this
using
is-
orchestration as a reactor or something like that.
Yeah, so as long as the process, if there's a new process started, my guess is that that caching would not be reused and the extension would be picked up. But I cannot say for sure that that's the case. We will have to dig into that issue.
So is this basically ready to use right now?
Yes. And honestly, it's ready to use for quite a few years. The only change that we are doing at this moment is simplifying the way you can define your extensions loaders, but it's backwards compatible. So we support both ways of defining the salt loaders to use. And we are also adding information to the versions report about which extensions and their versions, what's installed on the salt environment. That's what's changing on this last version of salt on the ERC.
Okay, so
3003.
So if I wanted to create a brand new MySQL module and state, I could do that right now, put it up on my own GitHub, and then release that to PyPy, and then use that.
Yes.
Right. Although there might be a
Yes.
name clash, I'd have to like.
So that's the issue that we were referring to. On this initial iteration or publicly available extensions iteration, you can override the namespace. There are good reasons for not allowing that. So once we deny overriding the namespace explicitly, you would have to tweak the configuration to allow such a thing, unless you name your MySQL module something different. So, yeah.
Okay.
Pedro, just out of curiosity, is there there may be situations where users don't want to publish their extensions on PyPy or publicly. Are we planning on a facility for sort of private imports?
So,
or a way of managing that? I've got one specific example in mind.
Yeah, so if they have an internal PyPy repository,
or if they just had the wheel file or the
right,
yeah,
like they could just host it on Git as a private repository, and as long as they have the keys and everything, they could just pip install straight from Git,
yeah.
Or they could distribute it as a wheel or any other standard way of doing it.
I wonder about the testing facilities you guys have, though. Like, could that be kind of broken out into its own package and used for those internal repos as well, so that you get the same sort of assurance that this is going to work across specific versions of Python and Salt?
Yes, I mean, you'd be able to still run the tests in your repository. We just wouldn't pick them up publicly and run them. Our plan today is that if it's a Salt extension that lives on PyPy, we're going to periodically run the tests to see what versions of Salt it works with.
All right. But it sounds like the only real advantage of this, or disadvantage of this, though, is that you have to restart your minions when you install the extensions, right?
Yeah, right now, that's
depending on the amount of
we
minions you
need to
have,
look
that
at
can be pretty problematic.
Yeah, this is the first I've heard of it. I think we need to just create a ticket and have someone dive into it. I don't know. I mean, as long as it's in the path, it should work. So we need to figure out why it's not.
So another question, when you mentioned the docs that needed update, what are you referring to this talk? I don't recall mentioning docs, but with all of these changes, and because salt extensions will rely on PyTest salt factories to test them, I've been revamping the almost non-existing documentation of PyTest salt factories, so we will have proper documentation. And we are also going to have a throughout document on how to create a salt extension. We did create the tooling that will set up the bare bones for you, but as I mentioned right at the start, it's an opinionated tool. You don't have to do things that way. The only requirement for a salt extension is that you define the entry points. That's it. So we planned on documenting on how you define your salt extension and what you can do with it. And so those docs are upcoming, and those docs will have to be updated. I don't know if I wasn't referring to SPM. Also, another question for Max Arnold. There's at least one third-party project that uses this entry points loading mechanism. Yeah, we've heard of at least, so that one, and I think another one or two. These will not be picked up off the bat unless they are using the keyword. But once we get the word out about salt extensions, it's just a matter of them adding these keywords to their extension, and we will be picking up their extensions and trying to test them, because not all projects have the same layout. But if you have Nox, we will target Nox-E tests-3. If you have that target on Nox, we will be able to test them. Possibly we can even use that for later stage talks if the project uses talks, but right now we are focusing on getting started, and hopefully the extensions will try to use a common ground of how to define them, and that will make our index work easier. But we'll see as we implement that. Any more questions?
I just want to reiterate for my comment in the chat, the testing matrix thing, that is absolutely gorgeous. I absolutely love that. Thank you.
Yeah, so right now that's a mock-up. That some tests did run, although at the time I just wanted to see if we could do something like this. We can, and in this case we are relying on GitHub Actions, so there's no cost associated with this necessarily. And this is just a static HTML page that gets generated with each test run of these extensions. If we can still use a static HTML page for this, or for as long as possible, then we will. And the plan to have a matrix, I think, is a gold point with regards to that. We want to know which extension works with which salt versions ahead of time. So that's something that we definitely want to keep.
I think that's absolutely beautiful. The next feature request, because people are never happy, right? Is can we look at the list of test names that are being done behind each one? But that's a future goal.
When you if you go to extensions.saltproject.io, you can actually click the successes, and it will drive you to a GitHub Actions run. And so you would actually have access to what run and why it has a passing or failing status for a while, at least. That link is not necessarily working properly because we want to target the exact test run for this salt version and this Python version, but GitHub Actions doesn't seem to, at least on its documentation, to see how we can target that particular build. So I can target the build as a whole, not a step at the build, in the build. I'm sure it's possible. I just haven't found the right way to do it. And again, this was a quick mock-up and minimally functioning example of what we are trying to achieve.
Still beautiful.
So.
Well, I see a lot of great possibilities here. I love where this is going. I'm quite excited about this. So looks great.
I agree.
Yeah, as we are.
Yeah, this is exciting. Well, if there's no other questions, we'll go ahead and adjourn. We are recording this. We'll put it up on YouTube, make sure that people can access it, and link to it on our events page. And thank you everyone for being here. And thank you, Pedro, for putting this together. This is great.
Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, everyone. Happy Friday.
Bye-bye. Thank you.